Let me begin with something that may be difficult to hear, but incredibly important to understand. Just because you feel something deeply for someone does not mean you are supposed to have that person. We live in a culture that often teaches us to treat intensity as evidence. If the connection feels powerful, we assume it must be destiny. If we cannot stop thinking about someone, we assume they must be our soulmate. If our heart races when they enter the room, we interpret the emotion as a message from the universe. But emotions are not always instructions. Sometimes an emotion is simply information, and that distinction can change everything. You may meet someone who seems to understand you in a way nobody else ever has. Maybe conversations with them feel effortless. Maybe you recognize something familiar in their personality. Maybe there is a strange sense that you have known them forever, and because the experience is so unusual, your mind begins creating a story around it. This must mean something. They must be the one. Maybe circumstances are the only thing keeping us apart. But what if the connection is real while the conclusion is wrong? That is where emotional maturity begins. A person can awaken something inside you without being the person you are meant to build a life with. They can reveal a part of yourself that had been asleep. They can make you realize what kind of communication you crave, what kind of affection you value, or what kind of emotional connection you have been missing, and yet none of that automatically makes them available to you. This is especially important when the person is already married. Your feelings may be genuine, your attraction may be genuine, your emotional connection may even be genuine. But the existence of genuine feelings does not erase another person's commitment. This is where many people confuse love with entitlement. They think, if I love this person enough, then somehow the circumstances should change. But love does not give us ownership over another human being. Love without boundaries can become obsession. Love without wisdom can become selfishness. And love without respect can eventually become destruction. You have to learn to separate what you feel from what you choose. That may be one of the hardest disciplines in human life, because your heart will tell you one thing while reality tells you another. Your imagination may create an entire future with someone who has never actually promised you one. You may replay conversations, interpret small gestures, search for hidden meanings, and convince yourself that every coincidence is confirmation. Psychologically, this happens because the human mind hates uncertainty. When something emotionally important remains unresolved, we naturally try to complete the story. We fill in the missing pieces, we create explanations, and sometimes we create a destiny narrative because destiny feels easier to accept than uncertainty. But maturity asks a harder question. What is actually true? Not what do I hope is true, not what would make this story more romantic, not what would justify my feelings. What is actually true? If they are married, that fact matters. If they have chosen a commitment, that commitment matters. If they have not clearly and ethically made themselves available, that matters. Your emotions deserve compassion, but reality deserves respect. And here's the beautiful part. Accepting reality does not mean your feelings were meaningless. Maybe this person came into your life to awaken your courage. Maybe they showed you what emotional depth feels like. Maybe they exposed loneliness you had been ignoring. Maybe they forced you to confront the difference between longing and love. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't, how do I get this person? Perhaps it is, who am I becoming because I met this person? That question puts your power back in your hands, because you cannot control another person's choices. You cannot control their marriage. You cannot control timing, but you can control your integrity, your boundaries, your healing, and the direction of your own life. And sometimes the strongest act of love is not holding tighter. It is knowing when to release. Your feelings may be real, but your future still requires wisdom. Never confuse a powerful connection with a permission to cross a boundary. There is another part of this story that people rarely talk about, and it may explain why certain connections feel almost impossible to escape. You meet someone, and suddenly they occupy a strange amount of space in your mind. You think about them when you wake up. You remember small details about conversations that happened months ago. A song reminds you of them. A particular place reminds you of them. Sometimes you don't even know why you are still emotionally affected, but something inside you keeps saying, there is something between us. And that feeling can be incredibly powerful. But here's what you need to understand. A powerful emotional bond does not automatically tell you what that bond is for. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We don't simply experience events, we interpret them. We connect moments together and create stories. When someone makes us feel deeply seen, understood, desired, or emotionally alive, our brain naturally gives that experience significance. And the stronger the emotion, the stronger the story can become. You may start thinking, nobody has ever made me feel this way. Then your mind takes the next step. Maybe nobody ever will. And eventually it becomes, then this person must be the one. But notice what happened. You started with an experience and ended with a conclusion. The experience may be completely authentic. The conclusion may still be mistaken. This is why emotional intensity needs to be balanced with discernment. Sometimes what feels like a mysterious bond is actually familiarity. Perhaps this person possesses qualities that resemble someone who once made you feel safe. Perhaps they validate a part of your personality that has been ignored. Perhaps they arrived during a vulnerable period in your life when you desperately needed connection. Timing can make an ordinary relationship feel extraordinary. Imagine someone walking into your life at the exact moment you feel lonely. They listen to you, they encourage you, they understand something you've struggled to explain to others. Suddenly, their presence becomes associated with relief. Now your mind doesn't just remember the person, it remembers how you felt when you were with them, and those two things can become difficult to separate. You may believe you are longing for the person when, at a deeper level, you are longing for the version of yourself that appeared around them. That is a profound distinction. Maybe around them you felt confident, maybe you felt interesting, maybe you felt desirable, maybe you felt hopeful again. And now that they are distant or unavailable, you assume that they were the source of those feelings. But what if they were only the trigger? What if they revealed something that was already inside you? This is where the idea of a soulmate can become psychologically complicated. People often imagine a soulmate as someone who completes them. But a healthier understanding is that another person can reveal dimensions of yourself without becoming responsible for completing you. You do not need another human being to make you whole. And you certainly do not need to destroy someone else's relationship to prove that your connection was real. If the person you feel connected to is married, your responsibility becomes even clearer. You can acknowledge the bond without turning it into a mission. You can admit, yes, this person affected me deeply, without saying, therefore, I must pursue them. Those are two completely different statements. And this is where emotional strength separates itself from emotional impulse. Impulse says, I feel it, so I must act. Wisdom says, I feel it, so I must understand it. That one change in mindset can save you years of confusion. Instead of constantly asking, do they secretly feel the same way? Begin asking, what is this connection revealing about me? Instead of searching for signs that justify pursuit, search for truth that produces peace. Instead of building an imaginary future around someone else's marriage, build a real future around your own growth. Because sometimes the invisible bond is not a promise of possession. Sometimes it is an invitation to transformation. The person may have awakened your heart, but you decide where that awakened heart goes next. And perhaps that is the real story. Not every soul connection is meant to become a relationship. Some are meant to become a revelation. Now we come to the part of this story that can completely change the way you interpret what is happening. Because sometimes the story you have been telling yourself is not the real story at all. You may look at a married person and think, there must be something unfinished between us. There must be a reason I keep thinking about them. Maybe they are unhappy in their marriage. Maybe they secretly feel what I feel. Maybe one day everything will change. And notice how quickly the mind begins constructing a future from uncertainty. That is one of the most dangerous things about emotional attachment. It can take a few genuine moments and build an entire imaginary relationship around them. A conversation becomes evidence, a smile becomes evidence, a glance becomes evidence, a coincidence becomes evidence. And eventually you are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to a story your mind has created. This doesn't mean your experience is fake. It means your interpretation deserves examination. There is a profound difference between what happened and what you believe what happened means. Maybe they treated you with unusual kindness. That happened. Maybe they remembered something important about you. That happened. Maybe you felt an undeniable emotional connection. That happened. But the conclusion that therefore this person is secretly meant to be with me is an interpretation, and interpretations can be wrong. This is where psychological maturity requires something that most people avoid, the ability to sit with uncertainty without immediately turning uncertainty into hope, because hope can become addictive. When you don't have a clear answer, your mind keeps searching. Maybe tomorrow, maybe eventually, maybe they will realize, maybe circumstances will change. And every maybe keeps you emotionally attached. You aren't necessarily holding on to the person anymore. You are holding on to the possibility, and possibility can be harder to release than reality. Why? Because reality closes doors. Possibility keeps every door slightly open. But you cannot build a healthy life by living permanently inside an open question. If someone is married, the first truth is simple: they have made a commitment. Whatever emotions exist around that situation, you don't have to turn those emotions into a secret relationship, an emotional affair, or a campaign to change their circumstances. You can step back, you can observe, you can protect your dignity, and most importantly, you can stop trying to force an answer that life has not given you. There is also a deeper spiritual lesson here. Sometimes we assume that if something feels emotionally powerful, God must be endorsing it. But spiritual discernment cannot be reduced to emotional intensity. Not every desire is a direction, not every opportunity is an assignment, not every connection is a covenant. Sometimes the very thing you want most can become the thing that teaches you self-control. Think about that. What if this person isn't in your life to become your partner? What if they are in your life to reveal your attachment, to reveal what you have been missing, to reveal the kind of love you desire, to expose an old wound, to teach you that you can experience powerful emotion without allowing emotion to control your behavior? That lesson may be far more valuable than simply getting what you want, because anyone can follow desire when circumstances are easy. Character is revealed when desire and principle collide, and when they collide, you have a choice. You can say, "I want this, therefore I will find a way." Or you can say, "I want this deeply, but I will not lose myself trying to possess what isn't mine." That second choice may feel painful, but pain is not always proof that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes pain is the price of letting go of an illusion. And once the illusion falls away, you may finally see the truth you could not see while you were emotionally invested. Perhaps the real story was never about winning someone else's heart. Perhaps it was about winning back your own. So stop asking only, "Why did this person come into my life?" Ask the deeper question, "Who am I becoming because they did?" Because when you discover that answer, you may realize that the greatest revelation was never who they were meant to be for you. It was who you were meant to become. There comes a moment in every emotionally complicated situation when feelings have to step aside and character has to take the lead. You can spend hours asking what this person feels, whether they think about you, whether they are unhappy, whether they secretly wish things were different. But eventually the most important question is not about them, it is about you. Who are you going to be when your feelings are strongest? Because anyone can behave with integrity when there is nothing to tempt them. Character becomes visible when desire gives you a reason to compromise. And if the person you feel deeply connected to is already married, This is where the situation becomes much bigger than romance. It becomes a test of boundaries, self-respect, patience, and emotional maturity. You may genuinely care about them. You may believe that your connection is extraordinary. You may even believe that you understand each other in a way their spouse does not. But you don't know the complete story of their marriage. You see moments, you hear conversations, you experience your side of the connection, but you do not possess the full reality of another person's private life. This is where the mind can become dangerously confident. We fill in missing information with assumptions that support what we want to believe. They don't really love their spouse. They are only staying because of circumstances. They would choose me if they were free. Maybe, but maybe not. And when your future depends on an assumption, you are no longer standing on truth. You are standing on imagination. That is why boundaries matter. A boundary is not a rejection of love. A boundary is a recognition of reality. You can care about someone and still refuse to become their secret. You can feel attracted to someone and still refuse to participate in deception. You can believe there is something meaningful between you and still decide that you will not interfere with a marriage. That is not weakness. That is strength under control. There is an ancient idea that true freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. True freedom is the ability to choose what is right even when you want something else. Think about that. If your emotions can dictate every decision you make, are you really free? If every attraction becomes an action, if every desire becomes a pursuit, if every fantasy becomes a justification, then your emotions are not serving you. They are controlling you, and you were made for something greater than that. Real love does not require you to become someone you cannot respect when you look in the mirror. Real love does not need manipulation. It does not need hidden messages. It does not need secret meetings. It does not need emotional games designed to create jealousy inside another person's marriage. And it certainly does not require you to convince yourself that hurting another person is acceptable because your feelings are strong. This doesn't mean you should deny what you feel. Denial creates another kind of problem. You don't have to say, "I don't care." You can say, "I care, but I choose wisely." You can say, "This connection affected me, but I will not allow it to destroy my values." You can say, "I don't understand why I feel this way, but I don't have to act on every feeling I experience." That is emotional intelligence. And perhaps this is the deeper lesson hidden inside the entire situation. Maybe your soulmate story is not asking, "Will this married person eventually become yours?" Maybe it is asking, "Can you love without possessing? Can you care without crossing boundaries? Can you experience desire without becoming its servant?" Those are difficult questions, but they lead to a powerful kind of freedom, because when you protect your integrity, you stop depending on another person's choices to determine your worth. If they stay married, you can still move forward. If they choose another path, you can still move forward. If the connection was meaningful but never became a relationship, you can still move forward. Your life does not have to remain suspended while you wait for someone else's circumstances to change. And that may be the most important decision you make. Don't measure love by how much you are willing to sacrifice your values for it. Measure it by whether it allows you to remain worthy of the person you see in the mirror. Now consider a possibility that is difficult for the heart, but liberating for the mind. What if losing this person is not a punishment? What if it is protection? When we desperately want someone, we tend to measure life by one question: how can I make this work? We rarely stop to ask whether making it work would actually create the life we need. That distinction matters, because sometimes we become so focused on a person that we stop examining the realities surrounding the relationship. We see their qualities, their smile, the connection, the chemistry, the memories. We imagine what life could be like if circumstances were different. But potential is not reality. You can imagine a beautiful future with someone and still be imagining something that was never promised to you. And this is where loss can become a teacher. Maybe you believe that if this person disappears from your life, something precious will be taken from you. But perhaps what disappears is not your future. Perhaps what disappears is an attachment that was preventing you from seeing your future clearly. Think about how often human beings confuse familiarity with destiny. Something can feel familiar because you have spent enormous emotional energy thinking about it. The more you replay a person in your mind, the more important they seem. The more you imagine conversations you never had, futures you never lived, and possibilities that never materialized, the more emotionally real those possibilities become. Eventually, you can grieve a future that never existed. That is a unique kind of pain. You aren't only losing a person, you are losing the story you created around that person. And sometimes that story needs to end before your real life can begin. If someone is married, there is another reality you must confront. Even if you somehow became involved with them, you might not receive the peaceful relationship you imagined. A relationship that begins through secrecy, emotional betrayal, or broken trust can carry consequences that chemistry cannot erase. You may get the person and still lose your peace. You may get the attention and still lose your dignity. You may get the relationship and still spend years wondering whether the same patterns that created your relationship will eventually destroy it. That is why wisdom asks a different question. Not can I have them, but what kind of life would this choice create? That question moves you from immediate gratification to long-term vision. And this is where personal power begins. You cannot always choose what happens to your heart. You cannot command yourself never to feel attraction. You cannot erase every memory on demand. But you can choose what you do with those feelings. You can choose distance. You can choose honesty. You can choose boundaries. You can choose healing. You can choose to stop feeding a fantasy that keeps you emotionally unavailable to the life in front of you. And perhaps, one day, you will look back and realize that what felt like rejection was actually redirection. You thought you were being denied something. You were being released from something. You thought a door was closing against you. Perhaps another door was finally becoming visible. This is not about pretending that heartbreak doesn't hurt. It does. Sometimes healing requires you to admit, I wanted this, I really wanted this, and I am disappointed that it didn't become what I hoped. That honesty is powerful. You don't have to spiritualize your pain so quickly that you never process it. Feel it, learn from it, but don't build your home inside it. Your life is bigger than one connection. There are people you have not met yet. There are experiences you have not lived yet. There are versions of yourself you have not discovered yet. And if you remain emotionally occupied with someone who is unavailable, you may never recognize the person who is actually available. That is the tragedy of obsession. It can make you loyal to a possibility while blind to reality. So, perhaps the question is no longer, why couldn't I have them? Perhaps the better question is, what becomes possible when I stop trying to? That is where healing becomes transformation. Sometimes the person you cannot have teaches you what you truly want. Sometimes the relationship you cannot enter teaches you what boundaries mean. Sometimes the goodbye you never wanted becomes the beginning of the life you were actually searching for. Don't assume every closed door is rejection. Sometimes it is protection making room for something healthier.